Here's my idea. Reading literature can help us imagine a different future. It can even help us plan for a better future. And it might even help us plan better for the future. I want to talk about my passion today and also about a preoccupation of mine. First, my passion. My passion is literature, reading it, talking about it, teaching it. And my preoccupation is the future. What are we going to do with our world? How are we going to make our world better? I want to talk about how we can bring these two ideas together. I want to talk about reading literature and the role it might play in forming thinkers, critical thinkers, who can also relate to others and imagine worlds different from their own and people unlike themselves. I want us to think for a moment about our childhood. I want us to think about when we were small and we could have imaginary characters people our world. Those characters came from books, and they also came from our own minds. And we were encouraged to have those friends with us who accompanied us and kept us happy and entertained. But as we grow older, we're asked to have those friends leave us. And they have to leave through the back door, never to come back again. I think we need to remember those friends, and I'll explain why. This talk stems from a preoccupation of mine. No one doubts that we're in need of thinking sustainably about our future. We have to think about the survival of our world. And locally and globally, this is happening. But it has to happen on a massive scale. And we have to ensure an environmentally sound, a just, and a more peaceful world. We have a long ways to go. And one of our responsibilities is to think about future generations. And we have to think about a world for them that would be more promising, with less consumption and more thinking, less inequality, and alternative ways of settling our differences. But what does it mean to think about future generations? Most of us don't know how to think about the future. We're taught at home and at school to think about the immediate future. So we think about what we want to be when we grow up, or maybe what we do when we retire. But thinking about the distant future is remote. We think and we agree that the irresponsibility of the past has brought about the problems of the present. But are we really thinking about the impact of the way we live on the future? For the most part, we have to answer no. And we answer no because we don't know how to think about future generations and future worlds and possible worlds. Some people study this closely. There's even a field of study called futures thinking, where they teach us about thinking about the world, possible worlds, probable worlds, And we have to begin to think this way too. What we know about thinking about the future comes from fictional utopias and dystopias. We think, for example, about the zombies who proliferate in the media today. But when we think about those zombies, they're not really the fears of future generations. They're our own fears that we project on the future. Thinking then about the future is going to involve different kinds of strategies. And I want to make it clear that my talk is not going to teach you how to imagine the future. Rather, I want to suggest that there are strategies that are imperative for learning to think about the future. And we need to pay serious attention to those strategies. Imagining possible futures is something we might be able to do by reading more literature. Talking about literature, about books, and about the literary imagination is nothing new. So what's innovative about what I'm talking about? Perhaps the Latin root of the word innovate helps us to understand this. It means renewed or altered. And I want to think, therefore, about my idea not as a new idea, but a renewed idea, a new way to think about something that's been around for a long time. I want us to be asking ourselves how we can think about reading as stimulating a creative imagination to help with the needs of our own world today. Let's think a little bit about some of the ways literature has been thought about. These are all perfectly valid ideas, and they continue to be valid today. But perhaps we're not listening closely enough, and we're not thinking about the impact that these ideas might have on our world today. Nadine Gordimer, for example, explains to us that stemming from life, fiction invents imaginary existences, events, and states of things. And it's precisely the imaginative transformation of fiction that allows people to understand their natures and to know that they're not impotent. For his part, Mario Vargas Llosa has explained how through the literary imagination, we can project our emotions on literary characters and thus feel more free under repressive regimes. Proponents of the new literary ethics go even further, and here I'm thinking of scholars like Dorothy J. Hale or James Phelan. They explain what happens to us when we read, and they explain that the collision of our own values with the values expressed in a literary text, that collision obliges us to open up to different values, like reciprocity, like mutuality, like difference. In other words, literary texts might be in cahoots with emotions, and not just any emotions, but social emotions that have profound transformative potential. So how do we promote critical thinking skills? How do we promote having people understand others better and understand worlds that are different? Reading literature can help in this way. It wouldn't be fair to not address the counter-argument here, and it's an obvious one. We've been reading literature for a long time, and we've still managed to make quite a mess of the world. An excellent example of this is the ruling class in Britain during the First World War, who declared war on Germany despite being extremely cultured and very well read. So what happened? What went wrong? Maybe we have to be thinking about literature and taking the lessons from literature and applying it to social responsibility, to thinking about the common good. And books and the ideas that books hold might very well help us do this. This effect happens through the combination of stimulating social emotions and reason or critical thinking. Children, for example, can be taught to read not only to promote literacy and to preserve cultural traditions, but also they can be taught to skills like encouraging social emotional reactions and creative solutions to deep issues that need resolution. Empathy and reason, in other words, must work together. And literature can be a perfect medium for engaging people to think about along these lines, to imagine the future thus. Creativity and imaginative thinking about the future is probably the best way to plan for a different future. We have to believe that humans are able to imagine a better world, another way of being, and that would allow for change. And though this change is probably not immediate and certainly not painless, it is possible. Reading literature provides more skills than you think. And as Martha Nussbaum says, literature focuses on the possible. It's up to us to decide what's possible, and it's time to let those imaginary characters from our childhood come back into our lives, but this time through the front door.